This has never happened before. What am I going to wear?
Today, with Halloween just around the corner, we will be reviewing a classic horror film, The Blob.
Wait, isn't that just the poster boy for cliche B movies? It can't be that good, can it?
Well, let's find out. At Lover's Lane, two teenagers, Steve Andrews and Jane Martin, are sitting intimately when they spot a meteorite coming down into the nearby forest and decide to check it out. Elsewhere, an old hermit goes out to investigate, leaving his dog behind to watch the house. In the forest, the old man finds the meteor, which cracks open. Inside, a strange, amorphous substance. When the old man prods the small blob with a stick, it latches onto his hand.
Oh Lord, Lover's gone bad!
Unable to remove the mass, he runs out into the road and is nearly hit by Steve and Jane. The couple take the old man to a nearby doctor's office, driving past some other teenagers, led by Tony. Dr. Halen is just about ready to lock up and leave town for the weekend when Steve drives up and the old man is taken into the office.
After uncovering the hand, Steve notices that the mass has become larger than before. Dr. Halen asks Steve to go back to where they found the old man to search for clues. Outside the office, Tony and his buds declare Steve the Speed King, and Tony claims he could beat Steve's in a race driving backwards. Steve takes him up on the backwards race and ultimately traps Tony's behind the red light.
Tony, he's all talk.
You don't know that.
Oh.
You know, come on now. You don't even know the guy. Give him a chance. Give him a McNuggets.
But they're my McNuggets.
Give him some McNuggets.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this draws the attention of a nearby police lieutenant, Dave, who pulls up to Steve's car and confronts the teens about driving backwards and on the wrong side of the road at that. Steve apologizes and Dave decides to let Steve off with a warning. Tony and his buds tell Steve and Jane about their own brush with the law, and Steve remembers he's got to investigate the woods. Tony mentions they're heading to the movies, but since they have the time, they decide to help search.
Well, that's nice of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, considering that they did get him in trouble and all that, I guess it's nice.
Oh well, bygones be bygones, I guess. The mass has become larger, and Dr. Halen tries to contact his doctor friend to tell him he won't make it to the conference he was going to attend, and when he calls a nurse to help him to amputate the old man's arm to stop the weird blob. In the forest, the teens find the old man's lantern and the remains of the meteorite which they spotted in the sky earlier. Steve and Jane find the old man's house with the dog still barking inside. With nothing left to find, Tony and his buddies head to the movie while Steve and Jane decide to bring the dog to the doctor's office.
Back at the doctor's office, the nurse arrives to find the patient missing and the now much larger blob remaining. Trapped by the blob, Dr. Halen tells the nurse to throw acid on the mass, but this only causes the color to change briefly. Dr. Halen goes to get his gun, and while he's gone, the nurse is consumed by the blob. Dr. Halen attempts to shoot the goo, but it is even less effective than the acid.
If we can't kill him with guns, what can we use?
What about pointed sticks?
Did you see what happened to the old man?
Alright.
Steve and Jane arrive searching the dark premise. Steve finds Dr. Halen trying to escape through the window, only to be consumed as well. Steve tells Jane what he saw, then drives to the police station.
What do you think the cops are going to do? They already think you're crazy. If you go in there with that kind of story, they'll just lock you up in an asylum, which might be preferable to existing in this cruel, cruel world of ours.
He's right, you know.
At the station, Sergeant Burt teases another officer, Richie, for playing chess, when Steve arrives and tells them what happened at the doctor's office. Dave is concerned while Burt is dismissive of Steve, thinking it's a joke. Dave, however, thinks it should be investigated and heads out with Bert and the teens. With the other officers gone, Richie decides to continue his chess match over the radio.
Arriving at Dr. Halen's office, the officers search the premises, finding the power is out, the room Steve saw the doctor in locked from the inside. As Jane worries about what happened to the doctor, Bert gets the power back on. They finally manage to get into the locked room and find the mess. Bert still believes that the whole thing is a prank the teens are pulling, especially when he learns that Tony was around.
Jeez, I guess Bert doesn't like kids. I wonder why.
The landlady arrives and informs the officers that, as far as she's aware, Dr. Halen is out of town, having talked with him just a while before he left, and that he may have gone with another doctor. The landlady tries to clean up the office while Dave wants the room untouched for investigation, and Bert informs him that Halen's friend has already left for the convention, meaning that they can't ask him about Halen's whereabouts.
At a nearby repair shop, a pair of repairmen are working late, and unbeknownst to them, the Blob looms near. Back at the station, Dave calls Steve and Jane's parents, and when they arrive, Dave explains the situation. Steve's dad sides with his son, but Jane admits that she didn't see just what happened.
Ultimately, everyone decides to head home for the night and hopefully figure stuff out in the morning. After the teens and their parents have left, Bert calls in to report that he hasn't found anything. After the call ends, Dave says that Bert acts like he's still in the war and that his dislike of teenagers is the result of an accident involving his wife.
Oh, so that's why this guy doesn't like teenagers.
This dude needs to relax. It was just an accident.
Yeah.
At her home, Jane tries to sneak out, but her little brother Danny catches her and wants to go with her. She tells him to stay home and to protect their parents and promise to bring him a dog back if he behaves. After his dad checks to see if he's asleep, Steve sneaks out himself and meets up with Jane outside his house. The two decide to search for the thing and quickly drive off into the night.
At the local theater, Tony and his friends are watching some late-night horror films when Steve and Jane come in and ask for their help. Outside the theater, Steve explains the situation, and of everyone, Tony takes him seriously, and he gets the others to agree to help search for the Blob. Back at the station, Bert tells of a bar he passed by on the way back that was strangely empty. Richie still hasn't heard from the doctors, and Dave decides to head home for the night.
Tony attempts to warn a party of the threat, but are just ridiculed. In the woods, Tony's friends happen upon a couple and politely leave. Other teens are trying to warn a bartender of the danger, and at his father's store, Steve and Jane spot the dog. They find the light still on and the door unlocked, and they think of the employee that always works late. They head inside. Jane spots the Blob, and the pair are pursued into the back room, holding themselves up in the freezer.
Brr, that's gotta be cold. Ugh.
The goo starts to seep in under the door, but soon retreats in response to the cold. After some time passes, Steve and Jane decide to check outside and find that the Blob is no longer blocking their path, and they flee from the store. They meet up with Tony and his friends who saw the dog running down the street, and Steve tells Tony to call the police. Unfortunately, Bert is the one to pick up, and he believes that the teens are just pulling another prank and hangs up. Steve and the others decide that they have to get everyone's attention.
Oh yeah? How you gonna do that?
At the station, Bert voices his paranoia over the kids when car horns and air raid sirens are blaring, waking up the whole town.
Okay, I guess that works.
Jane's parents find her missing and Danny sleeping in the living room. Nearly the whole town gathers at the store, angry about the noise. The teens do their best to plead their case. The police and firefighters arrive on the scene.
Bert sure is upset over what he thinks is just an elaborate prank, but Dave arrives and Steve pleads for him to believe him about the thing being inside the store. Dave decides to believe him, and after telling the townsfolk to return to their homes, he and the firefighters prepare to enter the store. Back at the theater, the movie marathon continues while the projectionist is attacked by the Blob, which begins oozing out into the theater proper.
Back at the store, Bert has made his way through without seeing anything when suddenly people begin piling out of the theater, followed by the Blob. This causes the town to panic, and Danny shoots the mask with a pop gun.
Danny, you fool! You'll only make it angrier!
Steve and Jane grab the boy and head into a nearby diner, which begins to be engulfed by the Blob.
Dave calls the diner and warns Steve that they're going to drop a power line onto the mass. The group in the diner go down into the basement and the line is dropped, but to little effect. With their oxygen depleting due to a fire, the group in the basement also find that the windows of the basement are covered by the Blob, and the group prepares for the worst.
Oh no, that's not good.
When is it ever good? Really, you need to stop saying that, because when you say that, bad stuff happens, and that's why we can't have nice things.
Should we go out and get some ice cream later?
Alright.
As the diner owner tries to put out the fire, Steve notices the mass retreats and recalls their time in the freezer, and he realizes the Blob can't stand cold. He managed to shout a warning to the dangling phone, alerting Dave of the Blob's weakness. As Dave tries to gather CO2 fire extinguisher, Jane's father breaks into the school with some guys to get extinguishers inside.
Wait, Jane's dad's the principal, right? He would have a key to the school, right?
There's no time, man!
As the town works on freezing the Blob with the extinguishers, contact is made with Washington to get transport for the frozen mass. The group in the diner's basement manage to escape. Steve thanks Dave for helping them to escape, and Dave tells him that the military are going to transport the Blob to the Arctic in order to keep it frozen.
That's good thinking. We'll have to remember that, whatever it was, in, the remotest of chances that were to ever happen to us, which is highly unlikely.
Yeah, right. This happening to us.
Yeah, this is just a movie. Nothing like that could ever actually happen.
Yes, but though, this is a classic film.
Yeah, this is probably one of the best B-monster movies ever made. I can, however, kind of understand why people would often lump it in with, other cliched B-movies.
But it is a really solid film.
I agree. This movie is awesome. Maybe a little old, but sometimes you just can't beat the classics.
There was a remake of the film, but we'll cover that another day.
Yeah. Well, that brings this episode of Kaiju Review to an end. So, till next time, I'm Proto Matt.
I'm Tank. What the heck is on your hand?
Ah!